Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from your lunch. I hope everybody had a great time. We have a great session in store for you. We have Natasha. She is a defense attorney, and she is going to talk about community from her perspective. So please welcome Natasha.
Thanks. All right, now what happened to my screen? Are you still able to see it?
Yes, we can see it. It just is all of your screens, all the slides.
All right, hang on. Okay, is that better?
Not yet. No. Oh, yes. Yes, it is.
Okay, all right, hopefully this works. Thank you for having me. I am happy to be here. My goal is to try to maybe put a different outlook out there from the defense attorney's perspective on some of the struggles that clients face when they're trying to re-enter back into the community and be successful on probation after maybe a long stay in jail or from prison or whatever it may be. And personally, I think in Dallas County, we have a really good streamlined process with our jail diversion program. And it just seems to work really well. So I was going to kind of put out there how we do things, and maybe if somebody can use one of those tips or tricks for their county. And, if it helps one person, I think it's a success. So that's my goal for today. I was gonna say you could ask questions as we go, but with the screen sharing, I can't see any questions pop up. So we might just have to wait till the end. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I put my email on the last slide, and you are welcome to email me something later if it comes up. But I can't see anything but the screen I'm sharing, so I won't be able to see if there are questions as we go.
Natasha, this is Jennifer again. I will watch the questions for you and let you know. We'll answer them at the end if that works for you.
That works perfect. Thanks. Okay, so just a little bit about me. I have been a public defender for 15 years. That's actually all I've ever done. I came out of law school and joined the public defender's office in Ottumwa. I worked there for a couple years, serving many different counties in Southeast Iowa. And then I moved to the Des Moines Adult Public Defender's Office and worked in Polk County for a while. And I'm still technically in the Des Moines adult office, but now I handle Dallas County, and I am the only public defender in Dallas County. I'm still in the Des Moines adult office, so I have an office there as well as an office in Adel. And we can't take everything. I can't take everything. You have conflicts and just too many cases. So when that happens, someone from the private bar does get court appointed to take on those cases, but they're not with the public defender's office. I am married to a prosecutor. He is a assistant county attorney in Warren County, so he helps keep me in check. But I definitely have a passion for public service and constitutional law. So I feel like this is the perfect job for me. The part that I enjoy the most is the client, and the client can be the most frustrating as well as the best part of the job, but that is the part I like, is having that client to talk to find out what that client's specific needs are, because everybody's case is super different. Their needs, what they need to be successful long term, what they need for their life or their desires is totally different for each case. And that's the part that I enjoy, is having that actual person to work a case up for. Um, I enjoy everything from the very beginning through trying cases. I do like to try cases. That was part of the reason I became a lawyer. And the whole process to get there is really the part that I enjoy. We all know that 99% of cases don't end up going to trial. So trying to find out what the client's needs are and what will work for that person is really most of the job. And that's definitely a team effort. There is no way one person can do that by themselves. Um, I find that my job as the attorney is almost to spot the client's need. What does this person need? And then kind of work with the connections that I have, or at least get the client in touch with the right person so that they can be successful when they do finally get out of jail or they get on probation or whatever it is. I don't think any one person, whether it be a prosecutor, probation officer, could possibly do it all by themselves. We all come from a different background, meaning we have access to different resources, connections with different people in the community, different ways to help the client. And it definitely has to be everyone working together to make it work for the individual person. So some of the main topics I kind of wanted to discuss that really affect how the client is going to be when they get out of jail. Are they going to be successful or not? Are kind of listed there, and we're going to go through them. But these are some of the main areas I found that have really made a difference. And again, how I deal with it and potentially, what we can do to help this. So when I talk about team effort, I really have to kind of talk about how we do it in Dallas County. I think we've got a great system set up, and it might not work everywhere. Dallas is a good in between, being a massive county. It's not Polk County, but it's not super small either. Um, so I feel that we work really well together between jail diversion, even just the administrators at the jailers, the individual jailers, and the prosecutors. We often all kind of get on a big email thread and really work together. We don't necessarily always adversarial and always fighting each other. We each have a special interest in mind and are advocating for that interest. But at the end of the day, 99% of the time, we are working together to try to find out what's best for the client because everybody wants the client to succeed. If they don't succeed, that means there are other victims in the community and that it doesn't help anybody. So I find that getting everybody involved from the beginning on maybe one email thread helps keep everyone on the same page. And that way, it doesn't feel like we're ganging up on one person or the prosecutor's brought in at the last minute and doesn't know what's going on. And they feel maybe that they're, the wolves trying to be pulled over their eyes, which isn't the case at all. So I find that if we can just kind of keep everybody in the loop from the beginning, it can really help. I like to use big email threads, but whatever open line of communication works for each organization is fine as long as everyone's kept in the loop. So the way our jail diversion works in Dallas County is it's run by the Heart of Iowa, and I kind of have two main points of contact. That's Casey Brim and Junior Jaime, and they're great. When a client comes into the jail to first be booked, they're typically given some sort of form to find out if they need services while they're in jail. Do they need to meet with jail diversion to get an evaluation that they might be ordered to do or get meds if they need to be back put on meds? And then Junior and Casey, if this form indicates that they need their services, they go meet with them right away. It's usually maybe a week later or so before I even get the case. And at that point, sometimes the client has already been set up with medication, is already on their way to becoming stabilized. They already have their evaluation at least scheduled. So it's a really good just initial process to kind of find out who needs services right away. Then what'll happen is a lot of times Casey or Junior will email me when they see I get appointed to the case and say, hey, I've been working with so-and-so. Here's what we got so far. Let me know what else you need or what are the referrals I can make. And that just helps streamline the process. It's already been started, which is great. Now, sometimes clients come into the jail and they're not in the right state of mind. And that first initial screening doesn't indicate they need services because maybe they just refuse to fill out the application or the form, or maybe they don't think they need services. Maybe they're detoxing at the time. So sometimes I meet with them. It's usually about a week or so later that they've been in jail before I actually get the case or even know anything about it. And then I'll talk to them and I'll be like, oh, man, something's just not right here. And a lot of times I don't know what the issues are. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a mental health counselor, but I can tell something it seems off and I'm not sure what it is. So I'll send an email to Junior or Casey and be like, hey, I know this person didn't initially say they needed services, but something's not right here. Can you just, meet with them again or see what you can do and tell me what you think and see what services we could possibly refer them to. And so then they'll go back and do a follow-up interview and it's like, okay, all right, now I kind of see what's going on here. But sometimes it takes that little bit of time between first being incarcerated to having that week or two to kind of get adjusted or maybe detox a little bit before it's known that this person needs services. And then they'll schedule an evaluation. A lot of times it's getting a person back on their meds, and they need a couple of weeks before they can really think clearly. But it's that initial reaching out to somebody that really makes a difference by the end of the case. It's that getting on it right away, even if there is that little delay, that by the time, we kind of get to their 90-day speedy trial, they've already been on their medication for 60 days. We're already starting this process. And that makes a huge difference when they do get out of jail. They've had this time to be medicated or have this plan in place and work on the issues that are going to come up when they do finally get out. One is always funding and insurance. We always run into this issue, and that's going to be a problem forever. But I know our jail diversion is great at helping find funding or getting people to apply for Medicaid so that they can have that treatment when they get out or get a bed somewhere that'll be paid for. And that's honestly, I don't know, but probably not part of their job description, but they do go above and beyond to get that paperwork filled out. And I don't know anything about it. I don't know how they do it. They're always emailing me big insurance words that I don't understand. And they always manage to come through with it and say, hey, we got to wait for 30 days for this to kick in, or they actually have to be out of custody before we can get this to kick in. But getting a way to fund a client's needs when they get out of jail is huge. It is night or day difference in whether they're going to be successful when they get out of jail and on probation specifically. If they already have what they need set up so they get out and they can go directly to their bed space, or we already have that funding set up with insurance and then they have their appointment to get their next 30-day supply of meds, that is absolutely vital for them. And they are often more successful when that's already set up for them when they get out of jail versus trying to figure it out, when they get out. Um, the other thing is we can't be afraid to just reach out to people and say, what's going on here? I don't think it always has to be such an adversarial process. And sometimes it does. We are an adversarial process, and sometimes things just have to go to trial, or sometimes all resources have been exhausted and prison is being requested, and that happens. But realistically, 99% of the time, it just takes a phone call or an email to somebody to say, what's going on here? I had a juvenile client recently who was at Central Iowa Detention, and I could tell by the couple of phone calls, just something wasn't right. It just wasn't clicking. But it was hard to tell, especially by phone call. Is the client just detoxing and not understanding? Is there a mental health issue here? Is this, not competent to stand trial? Like, what is going on? But it was very difficult for me to understand that. So I just picked up the phone and I called Central Iowa Detention and talked to his counselor. I was like, hey, what's going on here? And there's always this attorney-client privilege and HIPAA waivers and all that we have to worry about. But I think we can still reach out and ask for help and ask what's going on without violating those. I don't have to say anything about what the client told me or about their case just by asking the counselor what's going on. If the counselor or the evaluator, whoever, can have the client sign releases of information up front, especially for people they know they're going to encounter, like attorneys and probation officers and things like that, it can really help streamline that communication from the beginning as well. So the social worker then, kind of told me everything that was going on. And he's just like, man, we are trying to work here. There is something wrong. This person needs some mental health help. And so we then reached out to the Dallas County Jail because obviously this person was charged as an adult, and we got them on an email thread, and that's where Casey and Junior came in with jail diversion and the prosecutor, and we all kind of got on this email thread with Central Iowa Detention, and we were like, hey, what is best for this kid that we can get him some help while still working within the bounds of the law? I'm not asking you to dismiss his case. I'm just like, this is not working. He needs some help. And we all came up with a plan, and it took a lot of emails, but everybody pitched in with an idea here or there. And we eventually obviously had to have a hearing with the judge. And that way we were able to have everybody on the Zoom call with this judge. So when there was a question that I didn't know how to answer, that's when Casey chimed in, and she was directly in contact with the other people so she could provide that information. It's not like it always has to be just attorneys at the hearing. If somebody else can be there to provide the information, I call people all the time to hearings to tell the judge they can explain it way better than I do. But here's the process, and here's how we're going to get the person there. And that way we can answer all the judges and prosecutors' concerns for safety at the same time. And I really feel like that was a really good example of everybody working together to get that kid the help that he needed, especially right then and there, because I wouldn't have even had the slightest idea how to do that without help from these other people who were explaining different processes as far as the mental health and the juvenile side goes and all that. So I think sometimes we just have to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, what is going on here? Versus always assuming that they're adversarial to your position. So, one of the other issues I find for clients that makes a huge difference as to whether or not they're going to be successful when they get out and re-enter the community, or changes the trajectory a little bit, is when those that have to remain in jail while they work up their case versus those who can get released and work on their case from the outside. I think this is probably going more to clients who are stuck in jail on smaller misdemeanor charges, but it can sometimes be very difficult to sit in jail for 90 days, working up your case, and then get out and you're starting completely from scratch again, from square one. You've now lost your job. You were unable to get yourself into outpatient treatment and show the court that you are willing to do it. If you needed to do something like get a temporary restricted license, you can't do that. So sometimes that inability to get out of jail, again, more so on some of the smaller misdemeanor charges, I think really hinders a client's long-term potential for being successful because they have to start from scratch when they get out. I really like the pretrial release programs and the new ways we have of doing it. Polk County has a new pretrial release program that I think is going really great, and it provides more opportunity for some of these clients who don't have the stability on the outside, the friends and the family to rely on, that can still get out of jail. A lot of times, pretrial release is dependent on having somewhere to go, some stable living, and a friend or family member that's going to sign off saying you can stay there and it's okay, and that nobody else in that house is on parole or probation. And for a lot of people, that's almost impossible. And because of that, now they're stuck in jail for 60 to 90 days, while they're trying to work their case up instead of, being out and being able to try to make their situation better. So I think this is one of those things that can really affect how a client is going, if they're going to be able to, be successful when they get out, whether they have to start over or not. Not that it's impossible, but it does make it more difficult. And there's always, the clients who plead guilty to get out of jail because it's quicker to plead guilty, especially on a small misdemeanor, than it is to wait for their day in trial. And if they get out, then they can start working, they can get back to their kids. And I understand that, and that's not necessarily a wrong philosophy. It's just that long term, they're not thinking about all the extra consequences that go with that. Well, now I have more in my criminal history. I have more fines to pay. I have more costs, which again is a setback for long term. Not that it always happens and not that it's not able to overcome, but that is something that tends to be unfair to clients who just can't afford to bond out or don't have the ability to get pretrial release simply because don't have that stability that other clients do. They're at a disadvantage because every time they end up in jail, they're there long enough that they have to start over again every time. And they shouldn't get arrested. I understand that, but to some extent they are at a much bigger disadvantage than those who can afford to get out or get out on pretrial release. I think one of the other issues with reentry into the community is we have to talk to the client and decide whether they're ready to change. It doesn't do us any good to take up a bed space somewhere for someone who's not ready to get clean. And this is where I think talking to each individual client is super important. I would never advocate for a client to not try to get clean, to say, hey, yeah, just continue to use. That's not the goal. But realistically, everybody has to hit their rock bottom before they're going to get clean. And usually it's not the first time they get caught. Everybody's rock bottom is different. And I think we have to talk to the client to know if they're at rock bottom. What's the point in using your deferred judgment if we both know you're not going to stop using, you're not going to get clean? If you have no intention of stopping to use, why are we going to send you to inpatient treatment? Sometimes a client just wants to sit in jail for 60 days and then not be on probation. And at least they're sober during those 60 days. But if that's what that client needs at that moment, I think that's not necessarily wrong. We can't, make everybody go to inpatient treatment because inpatient treatment only works if the person wants to be there. And I think that sometimes we have to really sit down and talk with the client to know where they're at in their recovery or also just their self-awareness. Some people just aren't ready to work on their mental health issues. They aren't ready to address their prior traumas. And I don't think it is any good to make them if they're not ready at that point. That's a long process. And it can be very, very difficult. So I think sometimes we have to really just see where each person is at their spot to see if if treatment or placement in a halfway house or whatever is really going to help them. Because if it's not, then that's not their best opportunity at being successful. I think there's a really, really fine line, though, between not being ready to change or get clean and not realizing it's an option. So I don't think a lot of clients have any idea the number of resources that are out there, the number of places that are open and available to them as an option. A lot of times they just mark no on the initial screening. They don't need services or they don't need help because they don't know what there is out there and they just think it's going to be a waste of time. So it's not uncommon for me to sit down with a client at arraignment and say, look, I can probably plead guilty with time served right now and get out, but you are going to sit here and be in the same boat in another month when you pick up the same charges and you know it. I did so many thefts from Shields this winter of people stealing hats, coats, gloves, and it was that lack of stability. This was a crime of necessity, and that doesn't make it right. But I would say, hey, if you give me just a little bit of time and you sit in jail, I have a ton of resources inside that jail that can help you get out on probation with somewhere to live, with the treatment that you need, with a 30-day supply of your medications, and you don't have to go right back to being where you're at, which is completely unstable, having nowhere to go and being right back in this same position. And I would say about half my clients take me up on that. Half of them don't. And that's their decision. If they would rather just sit in jail and get out and not utilize the resources, we can't make them. But I really try to give them that option when I see these types of situations. And that's where my jail diversion and jail comes in. And sometimes being in jail makes the process quicker. It really does. Because you get first priority at a bed when you're in jail. Sometimes they have a special grant or funding if you need to get into inpatient treatment. And all it takes for me with the way we do it is I send an email to either Casey Brim or Junior High May, and I say, here's the issues. What do you think we could offer this person? And they usually say, okay, well, I'm going to go see them and have them sign releases for different places, and we'll get them screened and we'll get them set up on insurance. And it usually doesn't take very long, no more than 30 days. There's always that, hey, this could be a long wait, but it's very rarely ever as long as they say on the far end of it. And I have a lot of clients say, hey, I didn't actually know this, I'm willing to do that. And those are the ones who tend to be successful. The ones, who don't have that stability set up when they get out, we always see back. But again, we can't make them, but knowing that it's an option is something that I believe we have to present to the client. They don't know these things exist. So I really try to do that, but make sure the client just knows their options. And I tell them little things too, that sometimes when they get these evaluations, if they're going to be truly open and honest, their stuff can be very, very emotional and very personal. And I'll sometimes get the evaluation back that I'm supposed to file, and it'll say some very personal things. And I'll say, hey, we don't need to file this. Not everybody needs to know all these details. And I'll email the provider back and say, hey, can you just send me something to file with the court on a letterhead that just says so-and-so came in, they did this evaluation, and here's the needs we've identified, and here's our game plan. We're going to meet every week, or we're waiting for a bed at XYZ. And that sometimes can make the client feel a lot safer too, when they know that their deep, dark emotional traumas don't have to be paraded out there for everyone to see. And not that those evaluations are open to the public on EDMS, but the people they are open to are quite a few. And so I always try to reassure clients that way and say, we don't have to file this deep issue stuff. We can just make it a 2-line evaluation. And that will sometimes ease them a little bit as well. And getting those releases of information signed at the beginning for everyone, it really helps versus having to go back and have a new release signed for this person and a new release signed for this person. And that's one thing I feel like Casey Brim and Junior High may do a good job at, is anticipating who might need releases signed, and they get the client to sign those right away. And sometimes we don't. You don't know who may come into the picture. You don't know who your attorney is to sign the release. But if we can get those ahead of time, it can make the process a lot smoother and faster. This one doesn't have any sort of remedy, unfortunately, but I throw it out there so that people know that this exists, and it's the internet. I have so many clients call me after their case has been resolved, even if it's with a not guilty or dismissal, and they say, I can't get a job because my name's blasted all over the internet. Especially in smaller towns. In Dallas County, the Perry News likes to write a news article on almost every single person who's booked into the Dallas County Jail. And really, these articles are nothing more than just the complaint that's filed, that's public knowledge, but the name of the crime always sounds so bad. And most of the time, the client is not pleading to that charge, or what, they're actually found guilty of or whatever is nothing like what the complaint reads. The complaint usually just says boilerplate language because that's all it needs to be. And unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing the client can do about it. It is freedom of speech, people can post mugshots on their Facebook page, which always happens, and their media can write articles. And deferred judgments don't help that either. An acquittal doesn't help that. Once their name is up there, it becomes very difficult for clients to get jobs, to get housing. And all I can tell them is, hey, you can explain your story to the people and say, this is a news article. That's not what happened. Here's my final judgment or my dismissal or my actual disposition. There's nothing that can be done about it, though, at least not right now. And it's very difficult for those clients. Time has been the only thing I found that kind of helps. After time, those articles go farther and farther down a search page when you Google it or whatever. But the ease of information at everyone's fingertips so quickly and for free tends to haunt clients when they get out of jail. And it can really be difficult for them to get jobs or, do what they they need to do. I don't have an answer for it though, but I just throw that out there. Another issue that I find is clients lack trust. They don't trust anyone. Not just me, not just you, not just the judge, but they have a hard time following through with treatment or the advice you're giving them because they don't trust you. And it starts from early on for most of my clients. They never had a solid, safe person that they could trust growing up. They didn't have that sense of safe stability, and they grew up not really being able to trust anyone. They tell the teacher something and then DHS gets involved, and then they get in trouble by the parent for getting DHS involved, and it's just a big cycle. It's so building that trust with clients is imperative if they're going to actually take the advice and follow through with it, which is what will make them successful when they get out. The only thing I found that helps with that is just in-person time, face-to-face time with the client, and just hearing them out, letting them talk, which is always hard because we are all busy. None of us have time just to sit and talk. And a lot of times what they want to talk about isn't relevant to their case or really has nothing to do with it. But sometimes taking that extra 20 minutes and letting them talk can go a long way in building their trust. And if I can build their trust, then they'll take my advice. They'll take my recommendation and then give it 100%. And if they give it 100%, then they might be successful. But if they don't plan on following through with what it is the court's ordering or actually being successful, then it doesn't do any good. So that's something else that I try to do is build a rapport with the client and try to build that trust with them. So if they don't trust you, they're not gonna do what they're supposed to. And if they're not gonna do what they're supposed to, then they're not gonna be successful. Lack of stability. I already touched on this a little bit, but when the client gets out of jail, they don't have anything set up, and that's when they're just not going to be successful. If they don't have a stable house to go to, if they don't have a way to get their meds at their next refill, if they don't have a way to just have that normal routine of you get up, you go to work, and then you take your meds at night, and then you go to sleep. If they just live day by day and are couch surfing, that's when it becomes very difficult to become a productive member of society. I think that's probably why one of the main conditions of probation is you have to have stable living. But I think setting them up for stable living before they get out of jail is key. The clients don't always want to go to residential care facilities or halfway houses, and I understand that, but I honestly am a big fan of them. I think they are a great resource for clients if we can have that set up so they get out and go directly to that place. If they don't have anywhere to go, if they don't have a stable house where they feel safe and they can have a routine. The problem always is waiting for that bed. Can be a long wait sometimes, and that doesn't always sound well to clients, and I understand that too. But the places that we work with in Dallas County, like I said, the wait seems to be shorter, especially if you're in jail, obviously. The Heart of Iowa has a place in Woodward, and they do a great job of getting the client transitional living, and then they help them get a job and their own apartment and set up with their SSDI or their SNAP benefits or whatever it is, so that they're not just out on probation and have nowhere to go, nothing to do. That lack of stability is key to making sure the client can follow through with what they're supposed to be doing. I try as hard as I can to make sure they have that stability when they get released. Even little things like just having a ride from the jail. The Dallas County Jail is kind of in between Adel and Waukee, and it's approximately a 3-mile walk in each direction. So what I do is, first off, if they're going to be released from the jail, I try to have them fill out the probation packet in front of me with me and leave it with me. And then I go and drop it off at the probation office for them, because it's almost impossible for them to get out of jail, walk the 3 miles to Adel to drop it off before the office closes. And then usually they're going back the other direction to Waukee. There's no bus line out there. I find that that has helped, or having probation there at the courthouse to sign the clients up before they get out of jail has been huge as well. Otherwise, then probation can't get a hold of the client because the client, never came down to sign up, but it was a 3-mile walk and it's -20 out. So that's something that I personally think has helped. And then what I do is I give the client handwritten note with the probation number on it and say, you have to call them as soon as you get out of jail, and at least contact by phone. You can say my attorney dropped the paperwork off, and make sure they have a way to get a hold of you. I tried my best to set up rides for clients, especially when it's super cold out. It's difficult because Dallas County Jail is in the middle of nowhere, and they can usually get an Uber or something. But a lot of times the Ubers won't go out into the more rural communities like Redfield and stuff if that's their end location. We have no bus line. So again, that's where my jail diversion will help out. They have set up rides through different private companies for clients. I've tried to call family members to see if, we could, a little unconventional, but say, hey, they're going to be released from jail at this time instead of just released as soon as they get back to the jail, because you never know when that's going to be. But if we put in the order, they're going to be released at 1 p.m. on such and such a date, then I can call a family member, a friend, and say, hey, can you be there and pick them up so they're not just out and walking 3 miles to Waukee, especially like I said, with the weather sometimes. And not every client wants that. And if they don't, they don't. And I don't do it, but I try so that the minute they're released, they at least have some sort of potential at success there. I think lack of resources probably goes without saying, is that so many times our clients are released without the same resources that a lot of us would take for granted. Rides, if they don't drive, they don't have anybody else who does drive. It's not like they have a parent who has a valid license. It's not like they have that stability, again, that most of us take for granted. Sometimes they also just get these orders from the court that orders them to do a substance abuse eval, mental health eval, IDAP classes, and they just don't know where to start. And so then they just kind of give up and don't do anything. So I really try to write down for the client, here's a priority list, and I do it in handwritten notes so they can kind of see this is the important stuff because it's handwritten. Number one is get this evaluation, and it's going to cost approximately this much. Number two is schedule this, and here's the phone number. Number three is your IDAP, and if I can, I send them the link so that they, by email, so they can click on it, because sometimes they just get overwhelmed with all the things they have to do, and then so they do none of it. It sort of comes back to that just basic life skills that a lot of us, take for granted sometimes, that if we could just write it down for them and, just take the extra 5 minutes to explain, this is your priority order. And if you do this now, you'll save a late fee here. So then you can move on to this and organize it for them a little bit. It helps. It doesn't always work, and sometimes they don't care. But I find that if I handwrite some organization and steps, they will follow that versus just an order with a bunch of boxes marked. And I kind of covered this in the last slide, that your lack of sort of basic critical thinking skills. Sometimes instead of trying to figure out another way, if one way didn't work, they just shut down. And so there's always another way to figure it out. One of the major things holding a lot of clients back is their driver's license. So whenever I have a client who doesn't have a license, even if that's not what they're charged with, I try to log onto the DOT website with them and see what it is they need to do to get a temporary license. Are they eligible? I have them fill out the application right there on my computer. I email it to the DOT right then and there. The DOT sends them the response letter in the mail. And so it is kind of on them at that point. And a lot of them are always changing addresses, which makes it difficult. But I tell them, when you get the letter, snap a picture of it, email it to me so I can help look and make sure we're not missing anything. But here's what you have to do to get your license. And that can be a game changer for clients, whether they're going to be successful or not, as if they just have a valid license. That can be night and day difference for some clients. Clients have a lot of pending cases at one time. Sometimes they have a case in Polk and a case in Dallas, and then they don't know when anything is. And so I take a minute to look on Iowa courts online and write down their court dates under each case number in each county, and I color coordinate it. And I say, okay, Polk's court dates are in red and Dallas's are in blue. But you have to take that extra time, and that if you can save them a warrant for failing to appear on that, and it's not always because they're intentionally failing to appear. Sometimes they just don't know how to prioritize calendar, just do basic things, and these little things can make or break how they're gonna end their case and if they're gonna be successful when they get out. It's a lot of babysitting and handholding sometimes. And sometimes that is the drawback. But I find that the extra 5 or 10 minutes really makes a difference for that individual client. Money issues is obviously going to be an issue for, the end of time. It's always going to be something that is unfair, and things are always going to cost money. But sometimes clients can't even afford to make their ends meet at the end of the month, pay for their basic bills. Then they get frustrated when they have all these extra fines to pay, and then they have to pay for the treatment that they're ordered to do. And I get it. I'm not saying I think we should get rid of requirements. I'm just saying it is sometimes a lot for them. And it will be for the end of time, but it's definitely always going to be another barrier for those clients. So how do we kind of fix this? Like I talked about, I try to do as much ahead of time to set the client up before they get out of jail so that they can go directly to where they need to go, that it's already in place when they get out. So they're not just getting out and trying to figure it all out. And what do they have to do? Honestly, sometimes it is easier if my client remains in jail because our jail diversion gets everything set up. They get their insurance set up, they get the bed at treatment, and then we get the sheriff to transport. And they're great about that when the clients are in custody. Obviously, the drawback is they're in custody. So, pros and cons to each one. Just emailing people, email the probation officer when the client is on probation. And facing new charges. I don't think we always have to be enemies. I actually love our probation officers in Dallas County for the most part. I have no problem emailing them, being like, hey, what are your issues with so-and-so? What can they do? What do you think they need? What are their needs that I can help them get back on track or advise them to do? Do you think they actually need to go to prison? Have we exhausted all options? I don't have a problem doing that. I try to, CC the prosecutor on the email if, it's going to be important. But I don't think we always have to think we're always on opposite sides and fighting. I think 99% of the time we're actually working together. And I know sometimes we're not. Sometimes we've exhausted all resources and prison is what's being asked for. Sometimes you just got to go to trial. And those are fine. But in reality, most of the time, I think we're working together more than we are in opposition with the right client. There are some clients who just don't want to work with anybody or do anything. And those are our cases too. And then that happens in those situations. But I think most clients do want the help and the resources. Maybe not on the first go around. Like I said, everybody's rock bottom is different. But if we can show them what their options are and set them up with those with a little bit of hand holding, I think that can go a long way. Um, so that's all I have really. I am open to questions. This is my email. If you have anything in the future you want to shoot me an email, I am happy to answer those. And like I said, I wasn't able to see any questions, so now would be the time, I guess.
Thank you so much, Natasha. I don't see any questions in there yet, so if someone does have one, please put it in. Or as she said, you can email her as well. So Renee said, you seem so compassionate. Thank you.
Some days are easier than others, but that is why I like the job. I do. It's that passion with all of it together. But like I said, the client is what makes it worth it. I like fighting for a person versus a theoretical being. Some clients make it easier than others. That's how it's going to be, though. I think we can all understand that.
Jesse said, thank you for your passion and helping. And Stephen said, thank you for all that you do. So
Thank you.
a lot of great.
Have you had much luck with getting like other counties on board with like a global resolution when they have multiple county cases?
Hit or miss.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, yes. It's tough. It honestly is a case by case. It kind of depends on how many resources the client's already exhausted, how good of a relationship they have with the probation officer from another county or whatever. I recently had a very, very good resolution in Polk where I had a client in Dallas and he desperately needed this treatment, like bad. His PO recognized that. And so I emailed her and I was like, the bed's available, but this Polk County warrant is we can't do it. And she was like, I agree, he needs to go. Let me see what I can do on my end. And she took it upon herself to go get the warrant quashed that she put out. And we were all in a big email. So it does happen. But I think it's dependent on the client as well and how many resources they've exhausted at that point already.
So we do have a question from Tracy. How can organizations who provide services to folks in Polk County Jail connect with Public Defender's Office to let them know about the work we do?
I again would say email is the best. If you know who the specific attorney is, I would say directly email them. We all essentially have the same email. It's just our first initial last name. If you go on EDMS on the note of the appearance notice, their email is always on there. But if you're just wanting like the generic office email, I would just say Val Wilson, who is vwilson@spd.state.ia.us. Email I think is probably the best. I mean, you can always just call the office and say, I know Val is really good about getting back to people. Honestly, just as public defenders, we tend to use email, I feel like. Very efficient.
Thank you. Well, if we don't have any other questions, we can go ahead and take a 10-minute break. We have Judge Sandy up next. Thank you so much, Natasha, for your time and for coming to our conference and speaking. It was a lot of great information, so thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Appreciate it.